coming up on The World Today. Israel prepares for a new coalition government as Prime Minister Netanyahu kicks against it. Two people killed after a building collapses in a Rio slum in Brazil. Plus, Canada pays tribute to the 215 Indigenous children in healing ceremony in Vancouver. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. We're following up on the change in political landscape in Israel last night as opposition leader Yair Lapid announced to the president he has been able to form a government. 8 opposition parties reached that agreement to work together to form a new government, but the group still needs parliamentary backing to take office. Mr. Netanyahu, who tried to lobby parliamentarians into not siding with Lapid, has called on right-wing members to block the coalition from taking office. It had been 2 long days until the announcement, which took hours to make. And with 35 minutes of the deadline, Israel's opposition leader was able to officially tell the country's president that he has reached agreements with political allies to form a new government. Centrist Yair Lapid told President Rivlin in an email, "I am honored to inform you that I have succeeded in forming a government." The president congratulated him by phone, according to his office. After the announcement, a few dozen activists from the protest movement against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu broke out in cheers. Lapid's main partner is nationalist Naftali Bennett, who would serve as Prime Minister first under a rotation between the two men. Lapid will take over after about 2 years. Their coalition government would comprise a patchwork of small and medium parties from across the political spectrum, including, for the first time in Israel's history, a party that represents Israel's 21% Arab minority, the United Arab List. The United Arab List, led by Mansour Abbas, would be the first party drawn from the country's Arab minority, Palestinians by heritage, Israeli by citizenship, to join an Israeli government whose parliamentary approval is still pending. But the fragile new government, which would command a razor-thin majority in parliament, was only expected to be sworn in about 10 to 12 days from now, leaving slight room for Netanyahu's camp to try and abort it by turning lawmakers over to their side and vote against it. Current Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu controls 30 seats in the 120-member Knesset, almost twice as many as Lapid's Yesh Atid party, and he is allied with at least 3 other religious and nationalist parties. The new coalition governments would include Bennett's Yamina, centre-left blue and white, headed by Defence Minister Benny Gantz, the left-wing Meretz and Labour parties, former Defence Minister Avigdor Lieberman's nationalist Yisrael Beitenu party, and New Hope, a right-wing party headed by former Education Minister Gideon Sa'ar, who broke away from Netanyahu's Likud party. The new government, if it is sworn in, will face considerable diplomatic, security and economic challenges. Iran, the moribund peace process with the Palestinians, a war crimes probe by the International Criminal Court, and economic recovery following the coronavirus pandemic. And there are mixed feelings in Israel concerning the new coalition government that has been announced. It's a deal that would most likely unseat Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But let's take a listen to a few opinions on the streets of Jerusalem.
We are celebrating. It started as a protest to encourage the government of change, and now Lapid has announced that he has a new government. So this protest turned into a celebration. My fellow protesters and I were in the streets for more than a year, so it's a great celebration. We're hopeful for this change, for a better future for this wonderful state. That's why we're here.
We're celebrating formation of new government. For 2 years, Israel hasn't had any government. We have had several elections that were endless. And now we are hopeful for a new stable government.
The VOA's Linda Gradstein is in Jerusalem. Linda, what a historic night it was on Wednesday. The opposition finally reaching an agreement concerning this coalition government. While there was a lot of excitement in the Knesset and, in the camp of the opposition parties, some of them you heard there, those who were members of the parties appearing excited about it. There are those who do not feel that this was the right decision. Am I right?
Yes, you're right. I mean, I think that, Israelis are tired. It's coming after there was a war in Gaza just last month, 12 days of rockets, thousands and thousands of rockets coming into Israel, and very heavy Israeli airstrikes on Gaza, the year of the pandemic. And basically for the past, 2 years, Israel hasn't had a government. They've had 4 elections. All have been inconclusive. And I think a lot of Israelis are just saying enough. They're tired of politics. They just want their lives to go back to normal, and they just want there to be a government. So I think there's mostly a feeling of relief. But again, as you said in your reporting earlier, it's still not a completely done deal. It hasn't yet been sworn in.
Right. So from our understanding, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu still has a chance of remaining in office if he's able to convince the other political parties of his own government not to side with the opposition. But how much convincing can he really do now with Lapid having called the president to give him the news about his ability to form a government?
Well, he's been trying to do this now, in fact, since the election in March, and he's been, putting heavy pressure on several coalition partners and making lots and lots of promises. In fact, it was Netanyahu who first approached Mansour Abbas of the Arab List to join the party, promising all kinds of things for Arab citizens of Israel. And in the end, Abbas decided to go with Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett. You can see him there in the middle. However, I think he's sort of tried everything he could, and if he wasn't able to do it by now, I find it hard to believe that he will be able to do it in the next 10 or 11 days before this government is sworn in. That said, Israeli politics are often not predictable, and it's not over till it's over. But I think there is a sense among many of the opposition that they just want Netanyahu out of office. And these 4 elections in the past 2 years have been a referendum on Netanyahu as much as anything else.
Yeah, we have seen Benjamin Netanyahu, his reactions, to the announcement by the coalition has been, to lash out on them. He has called Bennett a fraud. He has said a few things about this whole plan to form a coalition government. And I know he's not happy about this, but this is just the first hurdle, right, to forming a government. Cabinet still has to be put together. A new prime minister still has to be named. How long before we begin to see, the first semblance of normalcy in Israeli politics?
Well, it's a pretty short process, actually. I mean, once the Knesset approves the new government, which could be anywhere from a week to 12 days, then that government would begin to function very quickly. And in fact, all of the jobs in the government, the different ministerial portfolios have already been decided upon. So I think that this government is kind of ready to move forward. If I can make one more comment about Netanyahu and Naftali Bennett, who you're seeing now on the screen. First of all, Naftali Bennett will be the first Israeli prime minister who's religiously observant. You saw he was wearing a kippah, a yarmulke on his head. He's also the second youngest. He's 49. Netanyahu, the first time he was prime minister, was 46. But there's also a lot of rivalry between Netanyahu and Bennett personally as well. Bennett was Netanyahu's chief of staff in the past, and they had a falling out. There's been a lot of reports that Sarah Netanyahu, Netanyahu's wife, does not like Bennett at all. So, everything is both political and personal as well. This government will be sworn in the next couple of weeks.
So both of them, I think their politics are quite similar, Naftali Bennett and Benjamin Netanyahu. So not much of a difference, though, when government really starts and he becomes prime minister. But a lot of Israelis also say they do not trust the left, and I suppose that's where Bennett belongs to. So how different could his own government likely be from, beg your pardon, Benjamin Netanyahu's?
Well, first of all, Bennett actually belongs to the right. He's probably more hardline than Netanyahu is. Bennett has said repeatedly that he does not think there should ever be a Palestinian state. He has said that he would like to annex a good 60% of the West Bank, which, of course, Palestinians see as the land of their future state. So Bennett is actually not a left-wing person at all. However, this government would include parties from the left, the middle, the center, like Yesh Atid and Yair Lapid, and the right. And after 2 years, Lapid is supposed to take over as prime minister if the government lasts that long. So Bennett will be first, and then second. It seems likely that this government will focus more on domestic issues like the economy, more on relations between Jewish citizens of Israel and Arab citizens of Israel. That coexistence was really frayed last month during the riots in Gaza, when there was rioting in the streets and a lot of violence between the two communities, which hasn't happened in many, many years. So I think we're not going to see any major foreign policy decisions, but more focus on unity, which is what Israelis have always said they wanted, and less on sort of large political decisions. Palestinians, by the way, many of whom say they don't really see a difference between a government headed by Netanyahu and one headed by Bennett.
Indeed. We did speak to a Palestinian yesterday who said really not much difference they're expecting. Linda, thank you again for joining us on the program.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We're still in the Middle East. 4 civilians, including 2 women, have been killed after a bomb blew up a passenger van in the Afghan capital today. 4 other people, including a woman and a child, were wounded in the incident. Militants in Afghanistan are adopting a new tactic to spread fear in the capital, Kabul, especially among the ethnic Hazara minority, planting bombs on crowded buses that have until now largely been spared such bloodshed. 2 blasts on buses in an area dominated by Shiite Muslim Hazaras killed at least 12 people and wounded 10 of them on Tuesday, raising new fears in the community and alarming security officials who say such attacks are nearly impossible to stop. Well, 2 people have been killed after a building collapsed in a slum in Rio. It happened in Rio das Pedras favela in the western half of the Brazilian city around 3 this morning. 3 other people were pulled out alive from the rubble after fire workers arrived at the scene. Emergency workers cordoned off the area as they continued their rescue work as day broke on in the area this morning. As in global environmentalists, the cry of pollution and impending disaster waiting to happen off the west coast of Sri Lanka, coast oceanography professor Charita Patriachi of the University of Western Australia says he believes the disaster was man-made. Sri Lanka has braced for the possibility of an oil spill since the Singapore-registered MV Express Pearl, carrying 1,486 containers, including 25 tons of nitric acid, along with other chemicals and cosmetics, was anchored off the Colombo port when fire erupted on board after an explosion on May 20.
Disaster, man-made, or what we call anthropogenic. From an environmental point of view, it is the worst environmental disaster, man-made, or what we call anthropogenic. Yes, we can. We can talk about the tsunami of 2004, but that's a natural disaster. From a man-made disaster, this is the worst to hit Sri Lanka. 3 containers we know fell into the ocean, which contain what we call nurdles, which are small plastic pellets. Which there were 78,000 kilograms of these nurdles, which equivalent to about 3 billion particles. And they were packed in a container, but also contained within 25 kilogram bags. And you may have seen images that they're collecting a lot of that in terms of in the beaches, whole kilogram bags, etc. So we don't know exactly how much of those nurdles have been released into the ocean.
Wow. Stay with us on The World Today. We have more stories coming up, including this one. China opened the Memorial Hall of the National Congress of the Communist Party in Shanghai. Join us again. Welcome back to The World Today, and to meet the Queen. U.S. President Joe Biden is off to the UK next week. He'll be attending the G7 summit, but during his time there, he'll be meeting with Queen Elizabeth II, becoming the 12th serving U.S. president to do so. Her Majesty has been meeting American presidents in Buckingham Palace since 1951, when she met then serving U.S. President Harry S. Truman. She was still a princess then. Since then, she's met all elected U.S. leaders during her 69 years on the throne, except, of course, for Lyndon B. Johnson. The UK is adding 7 more countries to its foreign travel red list because of the coronavirus. Countries added are Afghanistan, Bahrain, Costa Rica, Egypt, Sudan, Trinidad and Tobago and Sri Lanka. It comes as the UK's Prime Minister Boris Johnson celebrates the country reaching the milestone of half of all adults being fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Here's an update.
There were many people that made that happen. You still haven't apologised for your failure to protect care homes.
The Prime Minister's celebrations come as the Health Minister Matt Hancock says Britain is in talks with Oxford and AstraZeneca for additional doses of their COVID-19 vaccine that has been changed to better target the Beta coronavirus variant first identified in South Africa. Britain previously secured 100 million doses of the vaccine developed at the University of Oxford and licensed to AstraZeneca. And the Health Ministry says the extra doses under discussion will be tailored to target the B1351 variant. The first 50 migrants in a camp on the Greek island of Lesbos have been vaccinated as authorities begin rolling out vaccinations in migrant centers. Vaccinations have been taking place at migrant centers on 5 islands, including Lesbos, Chios and Samos, with Johnson & Johnson's single-dose shot. Australia's second most populous state, Victoria, has reported just 3 COVID-19 cases, its lowest single-day rise in more than a week, a day after a snap lockdown in the state capital, Melbourne, was extended for another week. Melbourne's latest outbreak has been traced back to a return overseas traveller who left hotel quarantine in the state of South Australia after testing negative, but subsequently tested positive in Melbourne. Over 704.8 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines have been administered across the Chinese mainland as of Wednesday, so says the National Health Commission. South China's Guangdong province is reportedly speeding up the vaccination process to curb a recent COVID-19 resurgence, and over 70% of residents aged between 8 and 59 have received the first doses of vaccine in the province.
Canadians have held a vigil in Vancouver to honour 215 Indigenous children whose remains were recently discovered at a former residential school in British Columbia. The Tecumseh Indigenous Nation announced last week it had found the remains of 215 children, some as young as age 3, buried at the site of the Kamloops Indian Residential School, once Canada's largest such school. Organizer Kat Norris called the vigil a healing ceremony intended to honor the children and the survival of Indigenous people. Between 1831 and 1996, Canada's residential school system forcibly separated about 150,000 children from their homes and subjected them to abuse, rape, and malnutrition at schools across the country in what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015 called cultural genocide. Run by the government and church groups, the school's stated aim was to assimilate Indigenous children.
And We're gathered here today at Gravity Park to honor our survival, to honor the 215 children that were found, and we're here to do a healing ceremony.
To other news now, Tokyo 2020 Olympic organizers today held an event to unveil the podium, costumes, music and medal trays that will be used during the victory ceremonies as the countdown to the opening of the Summer Games reached the 50th day mark. Organizers say the podiums were created using donated recycled household plastic to help contribute towards a sustainable society. Tokyo 2020 President Seigo Hashimoto noted the hardships that athletes have faced after the Games were postponed by a year because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but says that they were on the cusp of being able to compete. The Tokyo Olympics are scheduled to open July 23rd and the Paralympics on August 24th. Yes, we should all be prepared to be inspired. We move to China now, where the Memorial Hall of the First National Congress of the Communist Party of China in Shanghai has officially opened. It opened today after the 600-day construction period. The memorial contains the site of the CPC's first National Congress and a newly built exhibition area. The exhibition area spreads over 3,700 square meters and highlights the party's early days in Shanghai with over 1,000 exhibits, including 612 valuable relics, which were carefully selected from the 120,000 pieces of relics annually collected historical documents. And many of the relics are to be shown to the public for the very first time. Deputy Curator of the Memorial, Zhu Zheng, says efforts have been beefed up to collect relics and to retrieve a lot of historical materials from abroad, including Russia and the Netherlands, displayed over 600 pieces of relics. And that's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.